The supermarket was buzzing with the usual afternoon crowd. Shoppers pushed their carts up and down the aisles, scanning shelves for groceries, snacks, and household essentials. The air smelled faintly of fresh bread from the bakery section, mixed with the sterile scent of cleaning products near the front of the store. It was a typical scene, one that played out every day in towns across America, but on this particular Tuesday something unusual was about to happen. Lisa Miller stood in the snack aisle, her fingers brushing against the colorful bags of chips stacked neatly on the shelf. She was a quiet girl, barely 16, with long brown hair tied back into a loose ponytail. Her jeans were slightly too big, held up by a belt borrowed from her dad, and her sneakers squeaked softly as she shifted her weight. Lisa wasn't used to coming to the supermarket alone. Her mom usually handled the grocery runs, but today, her grandfather had dropped her off so she could pick up a few things for dinner. She glanced at the list clutched in her hand. Potatoes, milk, cereal, and chips. The first 3 items were already in her basket, leaving only the chips to find. Lisa scanned the shelf, trying to decide between barbecue and sour cream and onion. Her brother loved barbecue, but she preferred the tangy flavor of sour cream and onion. After a moment of hesitation, she reached for the bag of sour cream and onion chips. Just as her fingers closed around the package, a large shadow loomed over her. Startled, Lisa turned to see a man standing far too close for comfort. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with unkempt hair and a scowl etched deeply into his face. His name was Kyle Dawson, though Lisa didn't know that yet. All she knew was that he looked angry, and that anger seemed directed at her. "Hey!" Kyle barked, his voice sharp enough to make Lisa flinch. "Watch where you're going, kid!" Lisa blinked, confused. I'm sorry," she stammered, taking a step back. "I didn't bump into you." Kyle narrowed his eyes, clearly unimpressed by her apology. "You almost knocked me over," he growled, even though it was obvious he hadn't moved an inch. His tone was loud and aggressive, drawing the attention of nearby shoppers. A woman pushing a cart full of canned goods shot him a disapproving look before hurrying away. A young couple exchanged nervous glances and decided to leave the aisle altogether. Lisa felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She tightened her grip on the shopping basket, wishing she could disappear. "I really didn't mean to," she began, but Kyle cut her off. Yeah, save it," he snapped, waving a hand dismissively. Then, without warning, he reached out and grabbed the bag of chips from her hand. Before Lisa could protest, he tossed it carelessly back onto the shelf. "Maybe this'll teach you some manners," he sneered, his lips curling into a cruel smile. Tears welled up in Lisa's eyes as she stared at the crumpled bag of chips lying among the others. She wanted to say something, anything, to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she took another step back, clutching her basket like a shield. Kyle wasn't done. Emboldened by her silence, he leaned closer, invading her personal space once again. "What's the matter, huh? Cat got your tongue?" he taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. "Or are you just too stupid to talk?" Lisa shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. She couldn't understand why he was being so mean. She hadn't done anything wrong. Why was he treating her like this? Unbeknownst to either of them, someone outside the supermarket had been watching the entire exchange. Jack Norris, Lisa's grandfather, had decided to wait in his truck while she shopped. He'd rolled down the window to enjoy the cool breeze and happened to glance toward the entrance just in time to see Kyle towering over Lisa. At first, he thought maybe they were acquaintances having a disagreement. But when he saw the fear in Lisa's eyes and heard Kyle's harsh words carried faintly through the open door, he realized this was something else entirely. Jack sighed, shaking his head. He hated bullies. Always had. Always would. There was no excuse for treating someone like that, especially a young girl who clearly didn't deserve it. He hesitated for only a moment, debating whether to intervene. On one hand, he believed in letting people handle their own problems. On the other hand, this wasn't just any problem, it was his granddaughter. With a determined nod, Jack stepped out of the truck and headed toward the supermarket. His limp was more pronounced than usual, a reminder of old injuries sustained during his younger years. But despite his age, there was still a strength in his movements, a quiet confidence that came from decades of experience. As he approached the automatic doors, he adjusted his flannel shirt and prepared himself for what lay ahead. Inside the store, Kyle was still berating Lisa, his voice growing louder with each passing second. Other shoppers had started to notice, forming a loose circle around the pair. Some looked concerned, others simply watched, unsure of what to do. No one dared to step in, that is, until Jack appeared. "Is there a problem here?" Jack asked, his voice calm but firm. It carried an authority that silenced the murmurs of the crowd and drew everyone's attention. Kyle turned to face him, his expression shifting from irritation to surprise. For a brief moment he seemed taken aback by Jack's presence, but then his arrogance returned and he smirked. "Just teaching this brat a lesson," Kyle replied, pointing at Lisa. "Stay out of it, Pops." Jack didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied Kyle carefully, noting the way the man carried himself, the cockiness, the lack of respect for those around him. Then he glanced at Lisa, whose tear-streaked face broke his heart. Without another word, Jack moved forward, closing the distance between himself and Kyle in 2 quick strides. Before Kyle could react, Jack swept his legs out from under him with a swift kick. The thug hit the floor hard, grunting in pain as the wind was knocked out of him. Shoppers gasped audibly, some covering their mouths in shock. Others cheered quietly, relieved to see someone finally stand up to the bully. Kyle scrambled to sit up, his face red with humiliation. "What the hell, man?" he sputtered, glaring at Jack. "Who do you think you are?" Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he placed a single hand on Kyle's chest, pinning him to the floor with surprising ease. Despite his age, Jack's strength was undeniable. Kyle struggled briefly, but it was clear he was no match for the older man. "You ever mess with my granddaughter again?" Jack said, his voice low and measured. "And I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your life." For the first time, Kyle looked genuinely afraid. He nodded quickly, his bravado completely gone. Jack released him and stepped back, allowing Kyle to scramble to his feet and stumble away, muttering under his breath. The crowd erupted into applause, cheering for the hero who had put the bully in his place. Lisa ran to her grandfather, throwing her arms around him. "Thank you, Grandpa," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know what I would have done if you weren't here." Jack patted her gently on the back. "No one gets away with treating my family like that," he said firmly. "Now let's finish your shopping." As they walked away, Jack couldn't help but notice the looks of admiration from the other shoppers. One woman even stopped him to shake, his hand thanking him for standing up to Kyle. Jack smiled modestly, brushing off the praise. To him, it was just the right thing to do. But deep down, he knew this wouldn't be the end of it. Bullies like Kyle rarely backed down without a fight. And if Kyle or anyone else decided to retaliate, Jack would be ready. The applause from the shoppers slowly died down as Jack and Lisa made their way to the checkout counter. People were still talking about what had just happened, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others smiling with satisfaction. Lisa kept close to her grandfather, feeling safer than she had all day. She glanced up at him occasionally, marveling at how calm he seemed despite everything that had unfolded. Jack, for his part, didn't let the attention get to him. He simply nodded politely when someone thanked him or complimented his actions. "Just doing what needed to be done," he said more than once, his tone casual but firm. To him, standing up to Kyle wasn't heroic. It was basic human decency. Still, he couldn't deny the small sense of pride he felt, knowing he'd protected his granddaughter. At the checkout line, Lisa unloaded the items from her basket onto the conveyor belt, while Jack stood beside her, keeping an eye on the store's entrance. He didn't trust Kyle to stay away, not after the embarrassment he'd suffered. Sure enough, as they waited for the cashier to ring up their purchases, Kyle reappeared near the front doors. This time, however, he wasn't alone. 2 men flanked him, both looking rough and unfriendly. They whispered among themselves, glancing occasionally toward Jack and Lisa. Lisa noticed them too. Her grip on the shopping cart tightened, and she leaned closer to her grandfather. "Grandpa, Is that him again? She asked quietly, her voice trembling. Jack followed her gaze and nodded. Yeah, it's him, he replied calmly. Don't worry, sweetheart. I've got this. Kyle and his companions lingered by the entrance, clearly debating whether to approach. One of the men, a wiry guy with a scruffy beard, gestured toward Jack, saying something that made the others laugh. Kyle smirked, his confidence seemingly restored now that he had backup. But Jack didn't look concerned. If anything, he appeared even calmer than before. When the cashier handed Lisa the receipt, Jack took the bag of groceries from her and placed it gently in the cart. Let's go, he said, steering her toward the exit. As they moved closer to Kyle and his friends, Jack slowed his pace slightly, ensuring he stayed between Lisa and the trio. His presence alone seemed to command respect, or at least caution, from those around him. Kyle stepped forward as they approached, blocking their path. His two companions hung back, arms crossed, watching silently. You think you're pretty? Tough, huh, old man? Kyle sneered, his voice dripping with hostility. Humiliating me in front of everyone like that? Jack stopped walking and turned to face him. I didn't humiliate you, he said evenly. You did that all on your own. All I did was stop you from picking on my granddaughter. Kyle clenched his fists, his face reddening with anger. Oh, so you're gonna act like some big hero now? Well, let's see how tough you really are. Before Kyle could take another step, one of his friends grabbed his arm. Dude, chill, the man muttered, his eyes darting nervously toward Jack. This guy ain't messing around. Kyle shrugged off the hand gripping his arm. What, you scared? He's just some old dude. Jack raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. If you've got something to say to me, son, say it. But if you want to throw punches, I'll oblige. Just remember, you started it. For a moment, no one moved. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Shoppers who had been leaving the store paused to watch, sensing that something was about to happen. Lisa clutched the handle of the shopping cart, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to tell her grandfather to walk away, to avoid trouble, but deep down she knew he wouldn't back down, not when it came to protecting her. Finally, Kyle broke the silence. You're gonna regret this, he spat, jabbing a finger in Jack's direction. Then, without warning, he lunged forward, aiming a wild punch at Jack's face. Jack sidestepped effortlessly, letting Kyle's momentum carry him past. Before Kyle could recover, Jack grabbed his wrist and twisted it behind his back, forcing him to his knees. Kyle cried out in pain, struggling to break free, but Jack's grip was unyielding. The other two men hesitated, unsure of what to do. They glanced at each other, then at the growing crowd of onlookers before deciding against intervening. Listen carefully, Jack said, his voice low but clear. I don't want any trouble, but if you keep coming after me, or my family, I won't hesitate to make sure you regret it, understand? Kyle nodded frantically, sweat beading on his forehead. Okay, let me go. Jack released him with a slight shove, stepping back to give him space. Kyle scrambled to his feet, cradling his sore wrist. He shot Jack a venomous glare, but there was fear in his eyes now. Without another word, he stormed off, his friends trailing behind him like obedient shadows. The crowd erupted into cheers once again, several people clapping Jack on the shoulder as he and Lisa exited the store. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Jack led Lisa to his truck, helping her load the groceries into the back seat before opening the passenger door for her. You okay? He asked as she climbed inside. Lisa nodded, though her hands were still shaking slightly. Yeah, I think so. Jack smiled reassuringly. Good. You handled yourself well back there. Remember, sometimes standing your ground is half the battle. As he started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, Lisa stared out the window, replaying the events of the afternoon in her mind. She couldn't believe how quickly things had escalated, and how easily her grandfather had defused the situation. There was something almost magical about the way he carried himself, as if he possessed an inner strength that went beyond physical power. They drove in silence for a while, the hum of the tires on the road filling the space between them. Eventually, Lisa spoke up. "Grandpa, why were you so calm? Weren't you scared at all?" Jack chuckled softly, keeping his eyes on the road. "Of course I was scared. Anyone would be in that situation. But fear doesn't have to control you. Sometimes you just have to remind yourself what's important, and, for me, that's keeping you safe." Lisa smiled faintly, feeling a surge of admiration for her grandfather. "You're amazing, you know that." Jack laughed, waving a hand dismissively. "Nah, I'm just an old man trying to do the right thing. Now let's get home before your mom starts wondering where we are." By the time they arrived at the house, Lisa's nerves had settled, replaced by a newfound sense of security. Dinner. Preparations began shortly after, with Lisa chopping vegetables while Jack seasoned the chicken. The kitchen filled with the comforting aroma of herbs and spices, masking any lingering tension from earlier. Later that evening, as they sat down to eat, Lisa brought up the incident again. "Do you think Kyle will come back?" she asked, poking at her mashed potatoes with a fork. Jack shrugged, taking a sip of water. "Maybe. Maybe not. Either way, we'll deal with it if it happens. What's important is that you know how to stand up for yourself and that you've always got someone in your corner." Lisa nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she knew she could count on her grandfather. And if Kyle, or anyone else, decided to cause trouble again, Jack Norris would be ready. The rest of the evening passed quietly. After dinner, Lisa helped her grandfather clean up the kitchen, rinsing plates and stacking them in the dishwasher, while Jack wiped down the counters. Neither of them spoke much, but the silence was comfortable, filled only by the soft clinking of silverware and the hum of the refrigerator. Lisa's mind kept drifting back to the supermarket, replaying the confrontation with Kyle and his friends. She couldn't shake the image of her grandfather standing so calmly, so confidently, as if nothing could rattle him. When everything was tidy, Lisa settled onto the couch in the living room, flipping through channels on the TV without really paying attention. Jack joined her after a few minutes, lowering himself into his favorite armchair with a groan. His limp was more noticeable now, a reminder of the wear and tear his body had endured over the years. He stretched out his legs and leaned back, closing his eyes for a brief moment before opening them again to glance at Lisa. "You all right?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. "Still thinking about earlier?" Lisa hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I know you handled it, but what if Kyle comes back? What if he tries to hurt you or me next time?" Jack sighed, rubbing the back of his neck thoughtfully. "I can't promise that won't happen," he admitted. "But worrying about what-ifs won't do us any good. We'll deal with whatever comes our way when it happens." Lisa frowned, unconvinced. "But isn't it dangerous? I don't want anything bad to happen to you because of me." Jack smiled faintly, leaning forward to rest his elbows on his knees. "Listen, kiddo, life is full of risks. You can't let fear stop you from doing what's right. And protecting my family, that's always going to be worth the risk." Before Lisa could respond, the phone rang, breaking the quiet of the evening. Jack reached over to pick it up from the side table, pressing the receiver to his ear. "Hello?" he said, his tone neutral. There was a pause as whoever was on the other end began speaking. At first, Jack's expression remained calm, but as the caller continued, his jaw tightened slightly. Lisa watched him closely, sensing that something wasn't right. "Is that so?" Jack said finally, his voice low and steady. "Well, you tell your brother he should have thought twice before picking a fight today," the caller replied, their voice loud enough for Lisa to hear faintly even though she wasn't holding the phone. It sounded angry, aggressive. Jack listened patiently, his face unreadable. When the caller finished, Jack spoke again. "Here's the deal. If you've got a problem with me, come see me yourself, but leave my granddaughter out of it. Got it?" There was another short exchange, and then Jack hung up without waiting for a response. He set the phone back on the table and sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Who was that?" Lisa asked, her heart racing. "That was Ryan Dawson," Jack explained. "Kyle's older brother, and apparently, he's not too happy about what happened today." Lisa's eyes widened. What did he say? Jack shrugged, trying to sound casual, but Lisa could see the tension in his shoulders. He threatened me, said I'd pay for humiliating Kyle. Typical bully talk. Lisa swallowed hard, her earlier fears resurfacing. What are we going to do? For now, nothing, Jack replied firmly. We'll keep living our lives like normal. If Ryan wants to cause trouble, he'll have to come to us. And trust me, sweetheart, I've dealt with worse than him. Despite his reassurance, Lisa couldn't help but feel uneasy. She knew her grandfather was strong, stronger than most people realized, but Ryan sounded serious. What if he brought more people with him? What if they tried to hurt Jack? As the night wore on, Lisa struggled to focus on anything else. Even after brushing her teeth and climbing into bed, her thoughts kept circling back to the phone call. She tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. Eventually, she gave up and padded downstairs to the kitchen, hoping a glass of water might calm her nerves. To her surprise, Jack was still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea in front of him. A small lamp cast a warm glow over the room, highlighting the lines on his weathered face. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, smiling faintly. Can't sleep? He asked, gesturing for her to sit. Lisa nodded, pulling out a chair across from him. I keep thinking about Ryan and what he might do. Jack studied her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. You're scared, he said simply. It wasn't a question. I guess so, Lisa admitted. I don't want anyone to get hurt because of me. Jack reached across the table, placing a hand over hers. It's okay to be scared, Lisa. Fear keeps us sharp, but you can't let it control you. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stand your ground, even when you're afraid. Lisa looked down at their hands, feeling a lump form in her throat. How do you stay so calm all the time? How do you know what to do? Jack chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair. I'm not always calm, kiddo. Believe me, there've been plenty of times when I've been scared out of my mind, but here's the thing. Fear doesn't define you. What defines you is how you handle it. Do you run away, or do you face it head on? Lisa nodded slowly, absorbing his words. So, what should I do if Ryan shows up? If Ryan shows up, Jack said, his tone firm, you let me handle it. Your job is to stay safe and stick close to me. Understand? Lisa hesitated, then nodded again. Okay. Jack smiled reassuringly. Good. Now try to get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day, and we'll take it one step at a time. After finishing her water, Lisa returned to her room, feeling slightly better than before. Her grandfather's words had helped ease her anxiety, at least for now. As she climbed back into bed, she reminded herself that she wasn't alone. No matter what happened, Jack would be there to protect her. Meanwhile, Jack stayed up a little longer, staring into the darkness outside the window. He knew Ryan Dawson wouldn't back down easily, not after that phone call. There was a chance things could escalate, and Jack wanted to be prepared. He didn't regret standing up to Kyle. It was the right thing to do. But he also knew that sometimes doing the right thing came with consequences. With a sigh, Jack stood and turned off the light, heading upstairs to bed. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, he allowed himself a moment of peace. Whatever happened next, he was ready. The next morning, the house was quiet. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting golden patterns on the walls and floors. Lisa woke up early, her mind still heavy with thoughts of Ryan Dawson and his threats. She lay in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince herself that everything would be okay. Her grandfather had handled worse situations before, but she couldn't shake the feeling that danger was lurking just around the corner. Downstairs, Jack was already awake, moving quietly around the kitchen. He had brewed a pot of coffee and was reading the newspaper at the table, though his eyes kept drifting toward the window every few minutes. To anyone else, he might have looked relaxed, but Lisa knew better. Her grandfather wasn't one to sit idly when trouble was brewing. Even now, he was likely thinking ahead, planning for whatever might come their way. When Lisa finally came downstairs, Jack glanced up from his paper and smiled. "Morning, kiddo," he said warmly. "Sleep well?" Lisa shrugged, pulling out a chair to sit across from him. "Not really," she admitted. "I kept thinking about, you know." Jack nodded, setting the paper aside. "Ryan?" "Yeah." Lisa sighed, resting her chin on her hands. "Do you think he'll actually show up?" "I don't know," Jack replied honestly. "But if he does, we'll handle it together." Lisa appreciated his calm demeanor, but it didn't fully ease her nerves. She picked at the edge of the tablecloth, her fingers tracing invisible patterns. What if he brings more people? What if they try to hurt you? Jack leaned forward, his expression serious, but reassuring. "Listen, Lisa, I've been in tough spots before and I've always found a way out. You don't need to worry about me. Just focus on staying safe, all right?" Lisa nodded, though she still felt uneasy. Breakfast passed in relative silence, the two of them lost in their own thoughts. Afterward, Jack suggested they take a walk around the neighborhood to clear their heads. The fresh air might help both of them feel less tense. As they strolled along the sidewalk, Lisa noticed how peaceful everything seemed. Birds chirped in the trees, and the breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass. It was hard to imagine that anything bad could happen in such a serene setting. But even as she tried to enjoy the moment, her eyes darted toward every car that drove by, half expecting to see Ryan Dawson's face glaring back at her. Jack seemed to sense her unease. "You're doing great, Lisa," he said softly. "Just keep breathing. We're not going to let fear ruin our day." Lisa forced a smile, grateful for his encouragement. They stopped briefly at the park, watching children play on the swings and slides. For a moment, Lisa allowed herself to forget about Ryan and Kyle, letting the laughter of the kids fill her ears instead. It reminded her of simpler times before all this trouble had started. By the time they returned home, the sun was high and the sky and the warmth of the day had chased away some of Lisa's anxiety. Still, she couldn't completely relax. As they stepped inside, Jack checked the windows and doors, making sure everything was locked. It was a small precaution, but it made Lisa feel marginally safer. Later that afternoon, Lisa decided to distract herself by working on a school project. She spread her books and papers across the dining room table, focusing intently on her work. Jack busied himself in the garage, tinkering with an old clock he'd been repairing for weeks. The rhythmic ticking of tools against metal provided a comforting backdrop to the otherwise quiet house. But peace rarely lasts long when trouble is on the horizon. Just after sunset, the sound of tires screeching outside shattered the calm. Lisa froze mid-sentence, her pen hovering above her notebook. Jack appeared in the doorway moments later, his expression grim. They exchanged a glance, silently acknowledging what was happening. Through the living room window, they could see headlights illuminating the front yard. A black pickup truck had pulled into the driveway, followed closely by two other vehicles. Doors slammed shut and shadows moved toward the house. There were at least 4 men, maybe more, all dressed in dark clothes. At the center of the group was Ryan Dawson, his face twisted with anger. Jack stepped closer to the window, keeping low so he wouldn't be seen. "Stay here," he told Lisa firmly. "No matter what happens, don't leave this room." Lisa nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to protest, to beg him not to go out there, but she knew it wouldn't do any good. Instead, she watched as he grabbed a flashlight from the counter and headed for the front door. Outside, Ryan and his gang had fanned out across the yard, their voices loud and taunting. "Come on out, old man," Ryan shouted, kicking at a flower pot near the porch steps. "We've got unfinished business." Jack opened the door slowly, stepping onto the porch with the flashlight in hand. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, but his eyes scanned the group carefully, assessing the situation. "Looking for me?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. Ryan sneered, taking a step forward. "That's right. You humiliated my brother yesterday. Now it's your turn." Jack raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Your brother brought that on himself. If you've got a problem, take it up with me, not a teenage girl. Ryan's face reddened with rage. Oh, I'm gonna make sure you regret messing with us, he growled, motioning for his friends to surround the porch. Jack didn't flinch. Instead, he clicked on the flashlight, shining the beam directly into Ryan's eyes. The sudden brightness startled the man, causing him to stumble backward. Before anyone could react, Jack lunged forward, sweeping Ryan's legs out from under him with a swift kick. Ryan hit the ground hard, groaning in pain. The others hesitated, unsure of what to do. One of them, a burly man with tattoos covering his arms, tried to rush Jack, but Jack sidestepped him effortlessly, grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back. The man cried out, dropping to his knees. Another member of the group attempted to flank Jack, only to find himself pinned against the railing of the porch with surprising speed and strength. Within minutes, the entire gang was sprawled on the ground, clutching various injuries. Ryan struggled to stand, his pride wounded as much as his body. This isn't over, he spat, pointing a shaky finger at Jack. It is for tonight, Jack replied calmly, crossing his arms. Now get off my property, and don't come back. Defeated, Ryan and his crew scrambled to their feet and retreated to their vehicles, speeding away in a cloud of dust. Jack watched them go, ensuring they were truly leaving before turning back to the house. Inside, Lisa was waiting anxiously by the window. When she saw her grandfather walking toward the door, she rushed to meet him, throwing her arms around him. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm fine," Jack assured her, patting her gently on the back. "They won't be bothering us again anytime soon." Lisa clung to him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I was so scared." "I know," Jack said softly. "But you stayed strong, just like I told you to. That's what matters." As they stood there together, the weight of the evening began to lift. The threat had been dealt with, for now, and though Lisa knew life might never be entirely free of challenges, she also knew one thing for certain. No matter what happened, her grandfather would always be there to protect her. The night air was cool and still as Jack and Lisa stood together in the doorway, watching the taillights of Ryan Dawson's truck disappear down the road. The adrenaline that had coursed through both of them during the confrontation was beginning to fade, leaving behind a quiet exhaustion. Lisa shivered slightly, not from the cold but from the lingering fear that had gripped her heart only moments ago. Jack noticed her trembling and gently ushered her back inside, closing the door firmly behind them. He turned the lock with a soft click, ensuring they were safe. "It's over now," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "They're gone." Lisa nodded, though her hands were still shaking. She sat down on the couch, pulling a blanket around her shoulders for comfort. Her mind replayed the scene outside, the shouts, the scuffle, the way her grandfather had moved so quickly and decisively. It was hard to believe that someone as gentle and kind as Jack could also be so strong and fearless when it mattered most. "You were amazing," Lisa whispered, looking up at him with wide eyes. "How did you do all that?" Jack chuckled softly, sitting beside her. "Years of practice, I suppose, and knowing what's worth fighting for." Lisa frowned, thinking about what he meant. "Do you think they'll come back, really?" "Maybe," Jack admitted. "But people like Ryan don't usually stick around after getting knocked down. They talk big, but when it comes to real consequences, they tend to back off." Lisa hoped he was right. She didn't want to spend every day worrying about whether Ryan or his gang might show up again. But even if they did, she felt safer knowing her grandfather was prepared to handle whatever came their way. As the evening wore on, the house grew quiet once more. Jack made them both cups of hot chocolate, adding marshmallows to Lisa's cup just the way she liked it. They sat together in the living room, sipping their drinks and talking about lighter things, school, hobbies, funny memories from when Lisa was younger. Slowly, the tension began to melt away, replaced by a sense of normalcy. Eventually, Lisa yawned, her eyelids growing heavy. "I think I should go to bed," she murmured, setting her empty mug on the coffee table. "Good idea," Jack said, standing to help her clear the dishes. "You've had a long day." Lisa hugged him tightly before heading upstairs, feeling grateful for everything he had done. As she climbed into bed, she thought about how lucky she was to have a grandfather like Jack, not just because of his strength, but because of his wisdom and kindness. For the first time in hours, she fell, asleep without fear, her dreams peaceful and untroubled. Downstairs, Jack stayed up a little longer, sitting alone in the dim light of the living room. He wasn't worried about Ryan coming back tonight. They'd made it clear they weren't welcome. But he couldn't shake the feeling that trouble always found its way to those who stood up for others. Over the years, he'd learned that doing the right thing often came with risks. Still, he wouldn't trade his principles for anything. Protecting Lisa, teaching her to stand her ground, that was worth any challenge. After tidying up the kitchen one last time, Jack turned off the lights and headed to bed. The house settled into silence, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards as the old building shifted in the night. Outside, the world was calm, the stars twinkling faintly in the sky. The next morning brought a fresh start. Sunlight poured through the windows, filling the house with warmth. Lisa woke up feeling lighter, her fears from the previous night fading like a bad dream. She dressed quickly and went downstairs, where Jack was already flipping pancakes in the kitchen. "Smells good," she said, smiling as she took a seat at the table. "Thought we deserved something special," Jack replied, sliding a golden pancake onto her plate. "Maple syrup?" "Yes, please." Lisa grinned, reaching for the bottle. For the first time in days, she felt truly hungry. As they ate breakfast together, Lisa brought up something that had been on her mind. "Grandpa, why are you so different from other people? You're brave, but you're also really humble. Most people wouldn't act like that." Jack paused, thinking carefully about his answer. "I'm not sure I'm that different," he said finally. "Everyone has strengths and weaknesses. Mine just happened to lean toward protecting others. But remember, Lisa, being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you face your fears anyway. That's what makes someone strong." Lisa nodded, understanding what he meant. "So, does that mean I can be brave too?" "Of course," Jack said, smiling warmly. "You already are. Standing up to Kyle yesterday, even though it was hard, that took courage. And sticking close to me last night instead of panicking, that was brave too. Courage isn't about being fearless, it's about doing what's right even when you're afraid." Lisa smiled, feeling a newfound confidence. She realized that bravery wasn't some distant quality reserved for heroes in movies. It was something anyone could practice step by step. And with Jack as her guide, she knew she could learn to face challenges head-on. Later that day, Lisa decided to visit the supermarket again. Not because she needed anything, but because she wanted to prove to herself that she wasn't afraid anymore. Jack offered to come along, but she insisted on going alone this time. "I need to show myself that I can do it," she explained. Jack nodded approvingly. "All right, kiddo, but call me if you need anything, okay?" "I will," Lisa promised, grabbing her jacket and heading out the door. At the supermarket, everything seemed normal. Shoppers wandered the aisles, picking out groceries and chatting casually. Lisa walked through the store with her head held high, no longer feeling like she had to shrink into the background. When she passed the snack aisle where Kyle had confronted her, she paused for a moment, remembering how scared she'd been. But instead of letting fear take hold, she smiled to herself and kept walking. By the time she returned home, Lisa felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced in a long time. She told Jack about her trip, describing how liberating it felt to walk through the store without hesitation. "I think I'm starting to understand what you mean about facing your fears," she said. "It feels empowering." "That's my girl," Jack said proudly, ruffling her hair. "You're learning to trust yourself. That's the most important lesson of all." Weeks passed and life returned to its usual rhythm. There was no sign of Ryan Dawson or his gang, and Lisa gradually stopped looking over her shoulder whenever she left the house. School projects, family dinners, and lazy weekends became the focus of her days once more. Yet she never forgot the lessons she'd learned during those tense few days. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Lisa turned to Jack with a thoughtful expression. "Grandpa, do you ever get tired of standing up for people?" Jack shook his head slowly. "Not really, it's part of who I am. Sure, it can be tiring sometimes, but it's worth it. Knowing I've helped someone, that's what keeps me going." Lisa nodded, gazing out at the horizon. "I hope I can be like you someday." "You already are," Jack said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And you'll keep getting stronger, braver, and wiser as you grow. Just remember, always stand up for what's right and never let anyone tell you you're not enough." Lisa smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for her grandfather. He wasn't just a protector or a teacher. He was an example of how to live with integrity and courage. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she knew she could count on him and on herself to face them with strength and grace. As the sun dipped below the trees, casting the world in shades of orange and pink, Lisa leaned against Jack's side, content in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, safe, loved, and ready for whatever the future might bring.